Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host, Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and Auto Remarketing. Thank you so much for joining us for this session titled, Your Marketing Campaigns Are Holding You Back. It's all brought to you by our friends at VIN-IQ. But before we get started, just a couple of quick items to mention. We are recording today's session, so keep watch of your inbox for a message containing a link to it so you can review the great information and share it with your teammates. So that's all from me. Let's get right to our featured presenters from VIN-IQ, Steve Kump and Ashley Carter. It's all yours.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thank you to everyone for joining today. My name is Steve Kump, President and Chief Technology Officer with VIN-IQ. We are a marketing analytics and performance optimization tool for automotive marketers. And we'd like to take 30 minutes or so to share a number of insights with you today that we have compiled as a result of performing marketing analysis across campaigns for over 400 dealerships across or over the past 12 months. And so what we'd like to first look at is the fact that today's digital marketing campaigns that you're running on the major platforms like Facebook and Google may not actually be driving meaningful results for your dealership, at least not to the extent that you might think they are. So the problem is that automotive marketers unfortunately tend to rely on outdated or irrelevant metrics to measure the campaign performance. And they often use assumptions to define campaign strategy and tactics that ultimately result in tremendous waste and inefficiency. And a bigger part of this is that they lack access to the critical results data that is necessary to understand real success and make optimization decisions that drive that success. So my objective for this webinar is to help you understand these problems and demonstrate how applying the right data intelligently, your dealership could be actually selling more vehicles a little bit faster using your existing marketing spend today. So some of what I'm going to talk about today might sound a little familiar with you, but bear with me. I'm going to get into a ton of data that I know you've never seen before or were not originally aware of. So the first problem I want to discuss is how you're using the wrong yardstick or meter stick for our fellow Canadian colleagues that are joining today. What I mean by this is that campaign success does not necessarily equal dealership sales success. So certain metrics and conversions are what, as a marketer, you use to measure campaign performance and success. So we're going to look at things like impressions, clicks, click-through rates, website visits, page views, and conversions like phone calls and leads, as well as cost metric analyses performed against those. These are all typical campaign success indicators. And this here is not an exhaustive list. Of course, it's just intended to show some examples of metrics that most marketers are going to track. So I'd like to first take a moment and define what a conversion actually is, because this question is often one that we get from dealerships. So a conversion, by definition, is any action that's taken by a user that is of importance to you or your marketer, any action. It can be simple or it can be complex, and it includes actions like those shown here. So again, not an exhaustive list of conversions, but simply a few to provide context. So obviously page views, but it can be certain types of page views, return visits, chats, video plays, phone calls, form submissions, etc. So looking at the wrong yardstick perspective, most marketers set metric and conversion goals that they want to achieve to measure success for the campaign. So we take metrics and conversions and set goals. And those goals can be number of clicks, certain number of certain types of page views, what our pages per session will be, time on site, etc. Again, a number of examples presented here. But here's where the yardstick problem presents itself. Simply meeting or exceeding these goals can make the campaign appear to be successful, but it's often only a few vehicles that are actually driving most of those key metrics and conversions. While the bulk of your inventory doesn't get the attention it needs from the campaign to drive real sales performance for your dealership. So the major platforms use these goals to optimize campaigns and prioritize ads and creatives, which are often going to be vehicles in your ads, that are most likely going to drive the necessary metrics and conversions that you set as part of those goals. So this is going to result in inefficient spend without the sales success that's needed really to justify that spend. So we see time and time again, dealers spending tens of thousands of dollars on campaigns that deliver virtually no value in terms of driving vehicle sales. So let's look at a real world example. This table is going to list a number of typical metrics from a $9,300 Facebook campaign that was presented to a dealer by their agency. And we don't have to dive deep into each of these metrics, but a number of them in particular were called out by the agency. So the first one, click-through rate, CTR, 1.1%, very high click-through rate, a good performing campaign as a result. The high click-through rate thus drove a very low cost per click at 67 cents. I think most marketers would be very happy achieving a 67-cent cost per click. Session duration was good, 2 minutes, 13 seconds on average. It happened to be higher than most of the dealer's other paid campaigns. And conversion numbers from an aggregate level were also quite high. So based on these metrics, the campaign was considered to be a success. However, if we do a deeper analysis and look into data that's not maybe as readily available as these high-level metrics, the campaign doesn't look so good. So first of all, we can see 44 clicks from the campaign went to one single vehicle, 2018 Ford Raptor, listed at $89,700. 29% of the clicks went to a different single vehicle. This was a 2019 Porsche Panamera listed at $74,900. And 16% of the clicks went to yet a third single vehicle, this time a 2013 Nissan Altima, $10,900. So that left 11% of the clicks for all the remaining other vehicles. And in this case, 87 other units got some traffic from that additional click activity. Now, the problem is 61% of vehicles on the dealers from the dealer's inventory received no views at all from this campaign. That was 137 units that were left without any exposure from that $9,300 spend. So if we summarize all this, 89% of clicks were consumed by a mere 3 vehicles. And if we break that down from a cost basis and that $9,300 campaign spend, just to allocate it equally for against that cost per click, a number that we saw in the metrics, the Raptor consumed $4,000 and change. The Panamera almost $2,700, and the Altima almost $1,500 of the campaign spend. So we're going to come back to this campaign a little later and slice and dice it a bit more. But looking at those metrics, the problem is the example from the table assumes that any traffic to your website that converts is good traffic, but that's not really true. And we're going to show that as we get a little deeper into this presentation. You really have to perform a deep analysis to understand where the value exists or even if the value exists. And the problem is, if you don't understand what's actually happening as a result of the campaign, how can you be expected to optimize that campaign effectively? Or how can you improve on your own results? And we often hear from dealers that they tried this product or that product, and then ultimately they canceled the product and they noticed no effect in their business. And it's likely because while the campaign may have been driving certain results or certain metrics as results, and it might have looked good on paper or in certain reports, it actually wasn't affecting vehicle sales. So that's the yardstick problem. Problem number 2 I want to touch on is how search results page views do not drive vehicle details page views. So SRPs and VDPs. I'm sure everyone's familiar with those terms. We've heard a lot about over the last few years. But I want to talk about how search results page views don't drive vehicle detail page views. So SRP, search result page, or model-centric campaigns are a very common type of campaign targeted to shoppers. You essentially create one ad in Google or Facebook or Microsoft ads per model that your dealership sells. And then when shopper sees it, they click on the ad and they land on your SRP or your model page, new car model page. So marketers tend to assume that shoppers landing on an SRP or a model page are going to view multiple vehicles of interest. After all, you're in front of all of the Camrys or all of the Mustangs that the dealer has. So you're going to look at 3, 4, 5, 6 of those vehicles. But looking at the typical user flow, user sees an ad, mobile or desktop, they click it, they land on an SRP, and then ultimately they land, they go through and they look at numerous vehicles and VDPs. That's the assumption, but unfortunately it's not the reality. And when you look at the data, the reality is surprising even to most marketers. When you analyze the data, you can see the failure of these campaigns. That is the fact that most shoppers entering on an SRP never look at any VDPs. So more than 78% of shoppers entering on an SRP never even view one single VDP. So that means less than 22% of shoppers that you paid for in this campaign that land on your search results page only view at least one VDP. The number gets scary though when you look at it in deeper detail, and you can see that less than 6% of shoppers even view more than one VDP after landing on an SRP. What's worse, of that small percentage of people that actually look at vehicles, over 74% of them are going to look at the same few very popular vehicles over and over and over again, while the rest may mingle across the remaining inventory. So the bulk of your spend is really driving a lot of activity that never gets to a vehicle. And of those that do make it to a vehicle, they're looking at your most popular vehicles. So the overall average number of VDP views that shoppers that make it to a VDP actually look at is simply 1.2, a very small number and way less than the average marketer assumes the average shopper is going to look at. And that is only taking into account the shoppers that actually make it to a VDP. This is not averaging out those 78+% of people that never make it to a VDP. So this is a very eye-opening number for a lot of marketers and dealers in general. So a common rebuttal to this analysis, and we talk to marketers and dealers all the time, is like, well, I don't really need VDP views. My SRPs are robust. I've got numerous photos. I've got lots of different ways that shoppers can engage. I've got many calls to action. Shoppers can engage happily on my SRP with ever having to look at individual vehicles. And this too is a false assumption. The fact is that the data shows that engagement is what drives sales, and VDP views drive at minimum an increase in 9 times engagement over search results pages. So if we look at that a little bit deeper, we can see that the facts show a rapid and marked acceleration in VDP views and engagement over a 5 to 7 day period are the #1 indicator that a vehicle is about to sell. And we can see this if we plot the VDP view and engagement activity of all vehicles across a 30-day period leading up to their sale, up to their moment of sale. So this chart will show from day 30 on the left down to day 1 before a sale for all vehicles combined. So first, if we plot VDP views in blue, you can see that curvature nearing the point of sale. And the trend in engagement is even more severe. And that acceleration occurs as that vehicle is about to sell. This makes total sense. When I'm about to buy a vehicle, I'm looking at that vehicle 3, 4, 5 times every day on the dealership's website before I go and buy it. I'm looking at multiple photos, I'm engaging in the content, I'm reading the content, I might be doing some comparisons, I send the link to my wife, I send the link to my friends, they all have a look at it, and you get this acceleration of activity. So this is important, and this happens on the VDP. So if these SRP campaigns are so bad, why do marketers run them? And short answer is, well, it's what they've always done. They're quick and easy to set up. You only have to set up 8 or 10 individual ads for a particular dealership. They're relatively easy to maintain over time. Well, that's fine, but the bigger problem is that they're based on false assumptions. So the marketers, they tend to think that the campaigns are working, or they're getting results based on that incorrect yardstick that I touched on in the first problem. So some of the false assumptions are what we touched on, is that conversion metrics are at a high level. They're not at the vehicle level. So you can get all this conversion activity, but it's not telling you in any of your reports where that conversion activity originates and on what vehicles are shoppers converting. And are those vehicles ultimately selling is the big question. As long as traffic is converting, it's good traffic. That's another false assumption. And it's not to say it's all negative and people are blind. It's just there's no clear way to understand the relationship between SRPs, VDPs, and shopper behavior. It's all assumption based. Nor is there a simple way to measure the importance of the effectiveness of VDP engagement and how that actually drives to sales. So these assumptions have held over time because there's never been a clear, simple way to see what is really happening. Current mainstream reporting and analytics do not easily show this data. So the result of this is that massive waste occurs in these SRP or model-centric campaigns, and this waste can sap up to 80% of your budgets. And the problem here is not just that you wasted spend on a few vehicles. The bigger problem is that you're starving the remaining vehicles that actually need that exposure and engagement. You're starving them of that exposure engagement that they need to sell as fast as they possibly could. I think most people agree that if some of that $4,000 budget on that one Raptor was reallocated to 20 or 30 of the other vehicles that got no exposure from the campaign, the likelihood that those vehicles could sell would be greatly increased. So the logical reaction to this that most marketers say, or dealers as well, say, well, we should just be running more VDP-centric campaigns. So the issue there is that brings me to problem number 3, that running VDP-centric campaigns is only half the battle. So let's break that down a little bit. The good news with VDP campaigns is that 100% of clicks that you get are driving shoppers to your VDPs. And we know, as we've seen earlier, that VDPs are going to drive a significant lift in engagement over our SRPs. So we get that big boost of engagement. But as an added benefit, we've measured that shoppers entering on VDPs tend to look at more additional VDPs during their visit on average than shoppers who enter on SRPs. So we previously saw an average of 1.2 VDPs per visit for shoppers that entered your site through an SRP-centric campaign, but we can expect to deliver closer to 1.8 or 1.9 VDPs per visit for shoppers entering on VDPs. So that's a significant lift in average, almost 60%. And plus, we have the added benefit that this average is for 100% of visits. Well, the SRP average we looked at is only for about 22% of your visits. So because we remember, only roughly 22% of our shoppers even looked at one VDPs. So this added lift affects every single view, every single click from the campaign, and that creates a huge increase in overall VDP view activity and therefore engagement. So even with these benefits though, running VDP campaigns on their own still introduce a set of new problems that we have to be aware of. So the bad news is that these major platforms rapidly identify our most popular vehicles, and they're going to showcase them over and over too often to shoppers, and that causes this spend problem. We kind of saw that spend issue in that original problem one with the wrong yardstick, where so much of the spend went to a few vehicles. This really is where it manifests and why it manifests through a lot of VDP campaigns, and it serves the same vehicles over and over and over again. The major platforms are really good at figuring out what shoppers are interested in and which of your products are very popular, and match the two together, which creates this effect. So it works out to about 18% of your most popular vehicles will consume about 80% of your budget. Now, if we go back to that original campaign, we see this was a little bit more severe. A much smaller percentage of vehicles consumed 89% of the budget, but we can, in reviewing the Raptor, Panamera, and Altima, we can zero in on that Raptor for a moment, because I want to show some further troubling insights that become available if we really drill down into the campaign into this vehicle. Problem number one, Facebook, which was the basis of the metrics we looked at, was only one campaign of several that this dealer was running in that month. So if we look at the other campaigns and the spends from those campaigns that are attributable to this Raptor, we can see that Google CPC spent $1,200, Snapchat over $400, Amazon almost $1,600, programmatic display just over $1,600, and Edmunds social remarketing almost $600. So that amounts to a total attributable spend on this Raptor of $9,526 just in one single month, pulling out of the dealer's overall budget to this one vehicle. So since this vehicle was in stock for 95 days, when we add up the total spend on this vehicle across that entire period, it amounts to a whopping $22,886 spent on this Raptor alone. So that alone is shocking, but the story gets worse. Dealership groups often share their inventory across multiple websites in their group. That gives more exposure across all of the sites. It puts more inventory in each of the sites. And it's a great strategy in most cases. But when you do this and run your marketing in an uncontrolled manner, this will usually multiply this negative spend effect. So when we ran the analysis of that spend on the Raptor across the dealer group, it looks like this. Store 1 spent $22,886. We've already seen that. Store 2 spent $17,000 and change. Store 3 spent almost $16,000. Store 4 spent $18,840. Store 5 spent $12,000 and change. And store 6, being a much smaller store with smaller budgets, spent only $1,376 on this vehicle. So that means that this dealer group as a whole spent a staggering $88,841 marketing this one vehicle. Worse, the vehicle was marked down $8,875 over that 95-day period. So you look at the total margin hit against this vehicle, it's like $96,000. Obviously, that's beyond the list price of the vehicle, so there's no margin left at all in this vehicle. And insult to injury, on day 96, this vehicle was sent off to auction, so it never affected a retail sale. So the really, really bad news with this campaign is that this vehicle was already the most popular vehicle on the dealer group websites across the board from all free sources of traffic. So that's your direct traffic, your organic traffic, your referral traffic. So this vehicle was already crushing it statistically, yet all of the major campaigns latched onto the popularity of this vehicle and over-distributed and over-marketed it. The agency that was running these campaigns for the group considered the campaigns to be a brilliant success. Again, related to those metrics that we looked at that don't actually measure the campaign against what's happening on the lot, but measure it based on these outdated or metrics that aren't relevant. And this is not an indictment to the agency per se. They simply don't have access to this level of detail. So the problem, the last problem I want to touch on this is that these issues can be exacerbated when using dynamic VDP remarketing and dynamic prospecting type campaigns, because the more shoppers that are sent to the same popular vehicles, the greater the number of shoppers that are eligible to be shown those vehicles again during remarketing. And so the more likely they will be shown. And likewise, the more popular vehicles that get activity, the more dynamic prospecting algorithms will choose those vehicles to match to potential shoppers to attract them to your website. So all of these issues really compound into this major problem. And I think a lot of people are aware of this issue in general, but nobody is really looking at the granular spend and how severely that can affect both waste, but also that lost opportunity costs of preventing that waste and reallocating that budget to the vehicles that actually need it. And the last point on this is we presented this issue to a few of the providers of the individual additional campaigns that we listed after completing the analysis, and said, look, you really have to resolve these issues because there's severe waste, and look at all the budget going to one vehicle. And the common response automatically was that, yeah, we're aware that that happens. The popular vehicles get a lot of clicks because people want to check them out. But in our view, that's fine, because these additional clicks are getting shoppers to the dealership website. And from there, after they spent time looking at the popular vehicle, they're then going to look at 5 or 6 or 7 vehicles that they're actually going to be able to buy. Again, false assumptions across the board that are made without considering any of the data that supports those assumptions. So for reference, I've included the total spend on the other 2 vehicles that were called out in this campaign, the Panamera and the Altima. So that 2019 Porsche Panamera total spend across the group was $22,111, not as severe, obviously, as the Raptor, but still pretty severe. And looking at the Altima, 2013 Nissan Altima for $10,000, total spend on this vehicle, $4,600. Now, this is typically what happens in these campaigns. The bulk of the spend will affect your premium vehicles on one end of the spectrum and your low-cost discounted vehicles on the other end of the spectrum. You might say, well, I can absorb that overspend on the premium vehicles because I've got margin, but I really can't absorb that spend on these discount vehicles, which is a reasonable assumption. But the issue here is not simply the fact that so much was spent on these few vehicles. The bigger issue, as I've said it already, but I have to emphasize it because it's critical, the bigger issue is that those high spend vehicles are starving the rest of your inventory from getting the exposure that they need to help them actually sell in a timely manner. So how do we prevent this? Can we prevent this is the better question. The main problems that you face in this context as an automotive marketer are not simple. They're very, very difficult problems to identify and to solve. There's no straightforward way to address any of the problems that I've touched on today, but you have to be able to see those problems. You have to identify your problem vehicles. You may not have the Raptor that spent 88 grand. You may not have the Altima that spent 4,600, but you do have vehicles that are stealing your spend, that are over consuming your spend and robbing the rest of your inventory from their opportunities. So you have to be able to identify these. And unfortunately, you just can't see this type of data in your common reporting platforms like Google Analytics. You can't see it in other dashboards that are available because nothing is looking at the VIN level with the level of granularity that you need to understand and perform the calculations that I just showed. But it is happening. So, and that's not an indictment of Google Analytics. It's not designed for vehicles. It doesn't understand the concept of a vehicle. It understands page views, sessions, sources, users, and mediums, and engagement activity and conversion data. So not understanding a vehicle makes it really hard to figure out what is happening with your vehicles. And while you could maybe get down at the page level, it's just not as clear as we might want it to be. And if you can see the problem, that's just the start of it. You then need to take steps to correct it. So let's see what we can see. So you could achieve something like this acquisition report in Google Analytics using a few custom segments with some advanced filters applied. So I've created 2 segments, one called SRP entrances without VDPs and another called SRP entrances with VDPs. So this helps to corroborate at a high level what I touched on in problem number 2, that SRP campaigns don't drive VDP views. And you can set this up in your own Google Analytics relatively easily, and you can then see side by side what's happening. So you can see here the number of sessions driven by SRP entrances without VDPs. So these are SRP entrances that got no VDP views after the user landed on the SRP. We see 1,286 sessions. And then the second instance of that is the SRP entrances with VDP views. So we see there's 200 sessions. So already a huge discrepancy, about 1/7. So that's about 15% of all sessions that came in on SRPs actually generated VDP views. So you can also see the breakdown by source medium, and you can also view this report by channel if you wish. But once you've set it up, you can see it, and it corroborates what I was saying. We can see with this Facebook CPC breakdown here that we got 535 sessions with that landed on search results pages and that drove no VDP views. And in this case, we got 7 sessions that landed on SRPs and drove at least 1 VDP view. So that's even more severe than the average in this particular example. So this gives you some quantitative overview, and it allows you to corroborate what I was saying. Like, do SRPs drive activity? Well, you can see pretty easily if they do or they do not for your particular campaigns. And if you were to scroll through that source medium list, you would see all that are available, and you'd be able to see that. From a qualitative standpoint, you can look at pages per session and session duration. And at a high level aggregate, we can see that the SRP entrances without VDPs driving 1.8 pages per session with an average duration of 452, but the SRP entrances with VDPs is driving 6 pages per session with an average of 14.40. So based on these two metrics, you'd argue considerably better, but I still caution you that you don't really know what's happening in terms of which vehicles are getting exposure, how many of those are actually VDP views versus other page views, et cetera, et cetera. It's the best you're going to be able to do without tremendous amount of time and investment in Google Analytics, because it's pretty much what we can get to. Advanced users can get a little bit deeper, but it's really going to lack VIN specific data, which we believe is really necessary to see in order to understand what's happening. You're certainly not going to be able to achieve spend related data. So to get some insights onto vehicles, you can create some page view reports, and you can use some advanced filters with regular expression patterns that match how your website structure is depending on who your provider is. And while this can get you some details on the number of page views by VIN, it's not really easy to determine which vehicle is which based only on the URL, because depending on your website provider, they may have the VIN in there, they may not, it might just be an ID. You then have to kind of cross-reference or pivot that data to be able to understand what you're actually looking at. And a further complication is that many VINs appear on multiple different URLs on your website. And the worst part is that if you get multiple cluttered URLs, because you're getting all these different parameters coming in, which lots of platforms pass in on all this ID, this will make the same VIN show up numerous times. So it makes your problem more difficult to identify the VINs. And you can turn some of this off in the admin settings, but it's an ongoing maintenance issue because every time a new one crops up, you have to go in and add that parameter. So problems there in Google Analytics. So this is partly why most people kind of look at these high level metrics. So once you know which vehicles are the problem vehicles, because you've done all the work and drilled down, you could go about trying to restrict their exposure in Google and Facebook, Microsoft, Snap, whatever various platforms you're using. In Facebook, you can use what are called product sets, which allow you to create subsets of your catalog. So once you get your feed or your catalog put together and you get it into Facebook, you can stop Facebook from running every vehicle by creating a product set. And the sets allow you to create filters on different values that you can say, I'm going to create a subset essentially of my overall catalog, and I only want to run this campaign or this ad against these vehicles. So you could, using that method, you could easily remove the most expensive or the least expensive vehicles from your inventory and maybe move those vehicles into a different set that have a smaller budget. So you can really constrain what's happening. And it's a brute force approach, but it will work at reducing the waste for sure. But it does require regular updates and regular maintenance to be effective, and it's not intelligent. It's static in nature, so you have to revisit it often. And unfortunately, you can't easily achieve the product set concept in Google's business data if you're using that for your dynamic search ads. So you'd have to kind of do that yourself and create multiple feeds and then target. So it gets very complicated, and there's just no simple way to solve this. So, looking at the bottom line, you can't see what you need to see in Google Analytics. So you're not really going to be able to track your total spend and see which vehicles are consuming the bulk of your traffic in an easy way. And even an advanced user, as I mentioned, would have a very difficult time working through what is needed to see in detail how traffic is affecting different VINs, and then how those VINs ultimately ended up in terms of selling. It definitely wouldn't be automated. You can create custom reports, but that's just going to be, cobbling a number of different things together. And then even if you got all that data in a reasonably meaningful way, correcting the problem is a very onerous undertaking. You need to apply technology. There's lots of disparate solutions that maybe address a tiny piece of it, but it's really a brute force approach, as I mentioned earlier. There's just no tools that are designed to let you operate in this environment in a manner necessary to resolve the issues that I discussed today. So in short, there's really not a solution that you can execute on your own. So this leads me to what I want to present briefly, very quick, what we see as the way forward. So we know that you need to leverage and manage these major platforms so you can optimize the power of Facebook and Google and other major platforms to work in your favor, because today they're just not working in your favor. So after all, these things do consume the bulk of your budget, so we've got to control that. And you need to get these platforms to promote the vehicles that actually need promotion in order to get that exposure necessary to help them sell, not the vehicles that are already popular, not the vehicles that typically would consume the bulk of your marketing budget if left unmanaged. So we know this is the way forward, but right now it's extremely difficult to even access the data to understand what you need to do, let alone how do you implement an effective solution. So since there is no effective solution to this problem, we undertook the process of creating it, and we call that VIN-IQ. And we've spent the last 18 months building out this solution. And I'm very excited about this solution because it's what I would do if I were a dealer. And this is what we started out. We asked ourselves, if I was a marketer at a dealership, what would I do to solve these problems that we were well aware of over the previous years? So we start with the analytics, better analytics for smarter automotive digital marketing. And VIN-IQ provides automotive specific campaign analytics to show you exactly what's happening at the VIN level across all of your campaigns, all of your sources of traffic. And it tracks spend and determines what you ought to be spending on any one VIN, and then alerts you when you're exceeding that target and which campaigns are the root cause. And what this does is it provides you an apples to apples comparison of the value of each campaign that you're executing and what value are you getting from those campaigns across a range of more than 50 metrics that you can actually use for qualitative analysis, not just quantitative. And so looking at drilling down to the VIN level, you can see all these detailed metrics on a vehicle by vehicle basis, which include things like the lifetime spend on each vehicle, how much each campaign has spent on each of your vehicles over their lifetime, how much traffic and activity by channel and source medium and by campaign on a daily basis. So you really can understand what is happening and ultimately what is going to affect your sales. And VIN-IQ also tracks and reports on a shopper by shopper basis and demonstrates the attribution path for new and returning visitors. So what this allows you to do is see what campaigns brought you shoppers in the first place, new visitors, what vehicles did those shoppers look at, how many times did those shoppers return, and did they come back from other sources and channels, and what vehicles did they view that ultimately sold during that whole attribution path, and the timing of all of that. So you can start to understand, are you getting any return traffic from one particular campaign versus another campaign, and is that return traffic converting on vehicles that ultimately sell, and put that picture together to really understand where the campaign performance is driving value toward your sales. And so what we then do is consider campaign performance based on never before seen metrics and detailed sold vehicle analyses. Because ultimately, if something is driving sales, you want to try to replicate that. So this allows you to understand which campaigns are delivering results on a sales basis, distilled down to granular cost-based metrics that allow you to articulate the value. And VIN-IQ tracks sold vehicle performance in the trailing 60 days at the year, make, model, trim level. There's no one size fits all. If you're a dealership, you must achieve this many VDP views to sell cars. That is not how you have to look at the data. Every dealership is different. Every model in your inventory is different. And the performance of that in the past needs to affect the decisions you make going forward. So we make that analysis, we use that analysis, to make recommendations about which vehicles need to be marketed now and to what extent. And so we integrate, to solve the problem, we integrate dynamic product catalogs or your vehicle feeds into all the major platforms like Google Dynamic Search Ads, Google Dynamic Display Ads, Facebook Automotive Inventory Ads, and Facebook Shops, Microsoft Dynamic Search, and some of the emerging platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, and Pinterest, in order to optimize these campaigns to show the VINs that need exposure, prevent popular VINs from starving the bulk of your inventory of their fair share of the campaign budget. And what this does is it ensures greatly equalized traffic distribution to all of your inventory direct to your VDPs. And for dealer groups, VIN-IQ is dealer group aware. So what this does is it provides roll-up reporting across the group and displays detailed individual store information at the VIN level. So that ties into the integrated product catalogs so that they can be store specific and prevent the duplicate spend across your group. So you will never have that Raptor or Ultima problem again within your group. The system manages it as a group and controls it that way. The best part about VIN-IQ, in my opinion, is that we complement your existing campaigns and we support your chosen marketer. We do not take over or control your campaigns or your campaign budgets. We are an optimization tool. We are not a marketing tool. We are not a marketing agency. We don't get between you and your agency or your vendor. You can run the campaigns yourself or with your agency or vendor or any combination thereof, and we support your team and their team to deliver the best possible results that matter for your dealership. And in terms of best possible results, that means more sales, faster with the same marketing spend. And we drive more sales because we're stopping the spend waste on your most popular vehicles and redirecting that to drive exposure on your less popular vehicles. That makes sales happen faster because this redirection of marketing spend occurs constantly. It's not a once per month optimization or once per week optimization. It's constant and ongoing. And with the same marketing spend, because you're probably spending enough already, you're just wasting so much of it and you don't even realize it. Your marketer doesn't realize it. So you just need to use it more efficiently to affect the right results. So by applying the right analytics and then using those analytics to intelligently optimize your campaigns, you can be moving your results forward. So I went longer than I intended. I apologize for that. I tend to get excited when I talk about this stuff. For more information, please contact Ashley Carter, ashley.carter@VIN-IQ, and she can get you more information about how VIN-IQ can help you today. Thanks, Nick.
Excellent. Excellent presentation, Steve. A lot of great information and intriguing data that you've shared. And just a reminder that we are recording today's webinar, so keep watch of your inbox for a link to the recording of today's session so you can review the great information and share it with others at your dealership. And then Steve, just to wrap us up, just a couple of quick questions for you. Just as you referenced during the closing stages of your presentation, but to reiterate, just who in the marketplace would you compare the VIN-IQ technology to? How unique, or is there a comparison?
I don't think, Nick, there's any direct comparison in terms of anyone that's doing what we do at the granularity that we do. But in terms of sort of a genesis concept of what we're trying to achieve, I think the best fit is someone like vAuto. So when Dale Pollock founded vAuto, one of his main driving factors was that pricing a vehicle as a used car sales manager was really a gut instinct issue. There's no way a dealership could understand what the right price was for every possible year, make, model, trim, and condition that might come into your lot. And so if you price that vehicle too high, it sits on the lot and ages, and awaits markdowns until it's successful, and that drags out your carry costs. If you price it too low, you leave margin on the table. So Dale's goal and vision was to conduct some market analysis to allow you to understand what these vehicles should be priced at to get to the right price as rapidly as possible to increase the velocity at which you turn your vehicles. That's where vAuto comes from. So from our perspective, it's the exact same concept. Marketing is very often a gut instinct business. The assumptions that I touched on are often made on what people think are happening, but nobody is able to look at the data to know what is actually happening. So that same concept of providing the data to make the right decisions is exactly what we are applying in the VIN-IQ world, is taking the true analytics of what's actually happening across all of your campaigns and applying them to get your campaigns optimized right away so those vehicles get that exposure to sell faster. So I'd say that's probably the best comparison to answer that question.
Very good. That's great to have that point of reference and to have those potential results in mind. And that's perfect segue into next question I had for you, is to get those data points and trackable metrics that you referenced. How long does the platform need to create that solid analysis of what's happening with stores campaigns? How long from hitting that ignition button till getting the results do we need to let things germinate, so to speak?
Sure. So it's obviously going to vary by dealer, but we typically like to see one full cycle of your inventory turn to help understand what's driving activity on those vehicles. And we like to see at least a month of your typical campaign performance. So we generally will deploy our analytics tag and onboard a customer, pull in their inventory and get their sales data flowing in, and run that analytics for 4 to 6 weeks to really understand that. Now, that's not to say that we can't implement optimization right away to restrict spend on the most popular vehicles, because we see that in real time. But to make the best optimization, we like to see that happen over time. And we look at a 60-day rolling sales window to compute appropriate spend per vehicle and set the targets. And at the outset, your targets are usually very high because you're overspending on vehicles on average. So our system goes through a process to compute that. And then over time, our objective is to drive that average spend per VIN that's sold down. And that's one of the key success metrics, is to demonstrate that over a time basis. So you need to understand that in the first place. So generally 4 to 6 weeks at the outset, the data is collecting, and we work with your marketer and the dealership, or the marketer at the dealership, the agency, and we go through analysis, explain what we're looking at, and then we implement the plan to attack the most problematic campaigns first in order to correct the biggest waste and inefficiency. So 4 to 6 weeks is probably a good initial starting point, and then it just optimizes over time.
Again, the expert for today's webinar, titled "Marketing Campaigns Are Holding You Back," is Steve Kump, who is with VIN-IQ. And Steve, you referenced the store's inventory, and certainly continue to be in a unique landscape of low inventory levels. How have you seen that come into play with how the metrics turn out to be, how the tool can be of use, since we continue to be in a situation where inventories are still pretty soft?
Sure, and it's a common question that comes up. And again, it's often assumption based. A lot of marketers, a lot of dealers will look out the window at an empty lot and see 6, 7, maybe 20 units and say, I've got no inventory. I don't need to be marketing, or I don't need VDP-based marketing. But what they forget or misunderstand is that your digital marketing doesn't really pertain to the vehicles on your lot. It pertains to the vehicles you're showcasing on your website. So if you're listing 20 vehicles that are in stock and 80 inbound units on your site, those 80 inbound units are inventory from the perspective of how the platforms are optimizing spend against those units. So you still need to sell those inbound. You still need to optimize against what's happening with those inbound. So you have to consider your overall website-based inventory because your digital marketing is driving shopper activity to that site. So I encourage them to start with that before just making a wholesale assumption that I have no inventory, because we see a lot of dealerships that when you do the analysis, even though they thought they had no inventory because they have no units, there's one or two vehicles that are burning all of their spend and really hampering the sales or pre-sales of other inbound units. So that's what you have to consider from that inventory standpoint in this particular type of digital marketing.
Closing moments here for our webinar with Steve Kump and Ashley Carter from VIN-IQ. And if you have any questions for the team at VIN-IQ, Ashley's contact information is there on the screen. Ashley.carter@viniq.io. And Steve, to round us out, just kind of a nuts and bolts question. What's the pricing model for VIN-IQ and its suite of solutions?
Sure. So we operate on a typical technology subscription fee. So as I kind of alluded to, and what I feel is one of the best aspects of VIN-IQ is that we're not a marketing agency in this aspect. We're not taking percentages of your budget. We're not trying to control your marketing spend. We're purely a technology fee that you can subscribe to based on 4 different levels that may represent the needs of your dealership. So we've got a very low cost up to a full-blown version, depending, again, are you a single store, a smaller store, are you a group, etc. So there's 4 pricing tiers that break down that are broken down based on your level of need. So you only have to buy what level you need, and it's designed to optimize your spend. So it doesn't matter if you're spending $1,000 a month or you're spending $50,000 a month. You don't pay us any more based off of that. Our objective is not commensurate with your spend. It's designed to help you optimize the spend and deliver the ROI that we promise. So for specific pricing details, feel free to contact Ashley, and she can give you the breakdown of what works for your particular dealership.
Very good. Great way to round us out. Again, that's Steve Kump and Ashley Carter with VIN-IQ for our webinar, Marketing Campaigns Are Holding You Back. Steve, Ashley, thank you so much for the time and the great information.
Thank you very much, Nick.
And on behalf of all of us at Cherokee Media Group and Auto Remarketing, we thank you so very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you again next time.